This is Niswander. You are watching the Nowman Show, and we are here to have a panel discussion about building a united left front. So let's go around the table and identify all the panelists here by names. Tell your name and a little bit about where you're coming from. Let's start over on this side.
Sure. Hi, I'm Kendall Mayhew. I'm a writer and actor working and living in LA. I'm also a professional community organizer with People Organized for Westside Renewal, a community organization that works with low-income folks. And then I'm also one of the co-founders of Ground Game LA, which is also a community organization that's on the east side of Los Angeles in the Hollywood, Silver Lake, Echo Park kind of area.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm John Motter. I'm a local community organizer also with Ground Game LA, in addition to Democratic Socialists of America, Los Angeles. And nationally, I work with About Face, Veterans Against War, and Veterans for Bernie.
Fantastic.
Hello, I'm George Kallas. I'm a political science professor at Miramar College and also the coordinator for Democracy at Work San Diego. And also I work with Dan in Arete Media Productions as a co-partner.
Fantastic.
My name is Matthew Snyder. I teach at UC Riverside in the University Writing Program. In my downtime, I do activism, and I founded a podcast called The Future's a Mixtape, which is about creating and thinking about solutions tangibly, both locally and nationally, and to think strategically about opening the state of the cage. I do think the state is a cage, but it can come in different sizes, and we can even make a key to get out of it. So those are some of the projects I'm interested in.
Fantastic. So let's get right into it. We don't have a moment to waste. I mean, we see, we don't. We really don't. We've run out of time. We're running out of time, all of the above. So we're in, as we know, deep economic and political crisis right now, and virtually nothing is being suggested to address that, let alone do anything about it. So, I mean, just use a recent example of what went on in Puerto Rico and the slow to almost no response, which is just shocking and appalling to me personally. And then knowing that how slow things are still progressing, even in New Orleans and the Gulf after Katrina, which was how many years ago now. So we see through Oxfam statistics, the poverty is still there. The income inequality is growing year by year. Fewer people are getting more and more of the wealth, which, by the way, we all create together. And pathetically, from a political standpoint, as much as we all love Bernie Sanders, how many people from the Congress does he have standing with him for Medicare for all? 12. Pathetic. I mean, I'm going to call it for what it is. It's absolutely pathetic. Okay, so this is just kind of leading into this. You know, Democrats and Republicans are all on board to increase an already inflated military budget, and it goes on and on and on and on. Okay, now. You know, we've talked about solutions many, many times on this show, and one of the reasons why I created this panel discussion is so we can get more people together to talk about this. I thought it's fitting now to start moving forward aggressively on platforms and understanding policies and how you put these together and how people are already doing this. Okay, so first of all, let's look at what's going on in Europe. Let's go back. Let's just get a little history since this is the month of Occupy. We can do that. In Spain, if you recall, Podemos, right, came out of the Indignados movement, which inspired Occupy Wall Street, and the 99% movement, which we've talked about on this show. Then Syriza, a far left, supposedly far left political party, was voted into power in 2015. Okay, then Bernie Sanders. We have to mention this, even though we know about the superdelegates, and we also know the favoritism of the National Committee for Hillary Clinton. He still, as far as we know, at least got 13 million votes, and 1,900 delegates, a few have been sitting around this table, were in Philadelphia. Okay, Portugal. In 2015, the national elections, 3 parties unified there, because in a parliamentary system, that's how it works. You get a majority. The Portuguese Socialist Party, the Portuguese Communist Party, and the anti-capitalist Left Bloc Party. They rule the country. And as of October 1st, 2017, guess what? They won the municipal elections as well. Macron in France was elected basically as a neoliberal. His popularity has been plummeting, and that is, to put it mildly. And so, ending this on the Labour Party in the UK. 6 months ago, who would have thought that Jeremy Corbyn would be gaining as much momentum as he is? Hundreds of thousands of people, particularly young people, are joining the Labour Party, and they do have now what they call a manifesto. If you go online, you'll see it is a massive amount of information that people have worked very diligently on. So, to that point, let's get into solutions here, and let's start talking about these platforms. First of all, George Kallas is our political analyst here for the Nowman show, comparing let's say the Bernie Sanders platform, the Green Party platform, and the UK Labour Party platform. How would you contrast these?
Well, in my point of view, looking at the Corbyn victory and going over the manifesto, what I discovered is that they have it very well organized, they have it very detailed, and they have I would not say progressive. They actually have very close, I would call a near socialist concept in Britain, of all places, which is kind of the neoliberal capital of Europe, especially the city of London. It's kind of like our Wall Street. And it took the conservative Tories for a loop because he had such an outpouring of young voters when he promoted this manifesto, which was part of the platform that he used. And the core of it is something that we're talking about here is economic democracy, where he went back to the, I believe it was 1976, policy of trying to make industrial level co-ops. I think it was in the aircraft industry at that time.
That's right.
Right. And he wants to bring that back. Well, what happened was you had the Thatcher era, essentially in the 1980s, they came in and was kind of the neoliberal revolution that demolished a lot of the public ownership in the British economic sector. And then you had their versions of the corporate Democrats, was New Labour under Blair. He was kind of their version of Bill Clinton. In fact, they're very close, especially in the 1990s.
Yeah.
And so what
Personally
they did,
even
right,
close.
exactly. What Blair did essentially was went towards a neoliberal direction, was essentially continuing, as some Brits say, essentially Thatcher's policy for her. In fact, I believe there was one quote by Margaret Thatcher. She said, actually, her greatest, result of her administration was creating the new Labour Party. Okay, so you have a lot of parallels between the two, and that's the crisis we're facing today, because the corporate Democrats under the Clinton dynasty, if you will, lost the election last year.
One of the most interesting historical patterns is that there's a kind of a seesaw wave, what you call, where it's Thatcher, then Reagan, then Blair, then Clinton, and we had potentially Bernie Sanders and then Corbyn. So we're looking at right now increasingly likely that there'll be an election in the next year as UKIP falters in its coalition, which UKIP is a kind of Northern Ireland kind of hyper-nationalist, misogynist political party with queerphobic everything, like just really demonstrable politics. And as a result, that coalition is just these 10 seats. And if it falls apart, there'll be another call for an election, which fulfills that pattern of this back and forth. And if Bernie Sanders' organs are okay by 2020, he's got the most valuable organs of anyone right now, because there's so little chance for anyone coming through the Democratic apparatus as a political system.
Yeah, it's pathetic actually.
So we want to talk about how to move forward, right?
We want to talk about moving forward. Okay, what we want to get into here with the group is actually start to create a manifesto right here and talk about starting with economics.
Well, back to what we said about, if we take Corbyn's as a template and kind of synthesize what the Bernie-crats have and what the Green Party has, that's how I was kind of looking at it. Starting with economic policy, and then, of course, we'll go into foreign policy, but economic policy covering generally the basics, back to infrastructure development, alternative energy policy.
So So, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I need a little clarification of terms right
Okay.
now,
Sure,
because
sure.
we're talking about a lot of big ideas, but I'm not
Right.
hearing any specifics about what exactly we're talking about. You say manifesto. Are you talking about a national political platform for a federal election? Is that what you're talking about?
Right, for a united left platform to try to
To try and
consolidate
have a
various-
presidential candidate
Right, correct.
specifically.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, cool. Because I don't know what we're talking about when
Yeah.
we talk
Okay,
about
right.
this is the idea for this and blah blah blah.
Right,
We got to
right.
be real specific about what we're talking about.
Right.
But, John and I work primarily on a hyper local and local level,
Okay.
which is where we see major change happening. And so when we talk about not having a candidate who is available to go through the democratic apparatus, that's crazy. That's not true in my experience,
Right.
in my opinion, because, and I'm glad that you said the people who've been working on this already. Because I work with people who've been working on this already. They're not recognized by anyone in any electoral work at all. That doesn't mean they haven't been working on it already. The people I know who are most qualified for public office are people who live in public housing,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
That's who I
Yeah,
know
right.
who's
Yeah.
most qualified.
Right,
The biggest
right.
issue we have right now in this country is that we have a Congress that has a median income of $1 million.
That's right,
And we
that's
have
right.
nobody in Congress who actually represents anybody
Yeah.
who lives at or below the poverty line, and we have 15% of our population that lives in poverty. So the
At
biggest
least.
issue right now is that we have we have taxation without representation, which I don't know. Does anybody remember that? That
Yeah,
seems to be
yeah,
a big thing I
yeah.
heard
Right.
about
Yeah,
once.
exactly.
Right.
So, and that's the number one issue, is that the people who are least represented are the people who have no money. And I know plenty of people who have no money who are absolutely qualified for public office. They just are not seen as such by anybody who's involved in anything electoral.
Yeah.
That's very good.
So that's a really
Right,
important
right.
thing we
Well,
need to
that
be talking
addresses
about
the
before we even
issue
talk about what a
of-
national
right.
platform looks like.
Yeah.
Because I keep hearing the narrative of we don't have anybody coming through the pipeline. We have a ton of people who are available for the pipeline, but the
Oh,
pipeline isn't recognizing them. That's a bigger
Right,
issue.
right.
It's this worship of celebrity culture that's endemic of the political structure. So people, so for instance, the draft Bernie party,
That's a
it's
part
all
of it.
it's all
It's
part
also
of
a meritocracy issue.
Yeah, and this idea that we'll have this one candidate transform things, and if we're going to have a total revolution, we're going to need. We're going to need systemic change on the local level. So, for instance, there's a group I'm involved with called IE 2030, which is called Inland Empire 2030, and we're working on the local level. And increasingly, I'm more interested in that because politics are kind of done on the electoral level for 3.5 years. There
Right.
really is nothing
Right.
substantial that's going to happen.
Right.
And so local politics will be the transformative politics for the left.
If I may, I'd like also to point out a problem with the conversation we've already had as such, which is talking about countries like France, Portugal, the UK, as though they are comparable to the United States. That is hugely problematic. Those are countries that have a much smaller population than this country does. They have a very different governmental structure. They have a very different history. We continue to, in the media, conflate the United States with individual countries in Europe. And this is a major problem because it decontextualizes for the viewer, for the consumer, what the US is. The majority of people in this country don't understand the massive population of the United States and also the individual populations of each state. So as Californians, we are faced with an atmosphere where nobody in the national media talks about California as though it is the largest state in the country by population. Nobody
Right.
knows that. Nobody acknowledges it. So we get to talk. Nobody talks about Los Angeles as though it is what it is, which is if Los Angeles was a state, it would be the 20th largest state in the country by population.
Right.
So is that what it is, or larger than 20 states? It's one of the two. The point is that when we talk about Los Angeles and we talk about the state of Minnesota, we're talking about the same population.
Right.
And that's not talked about, and that is a big part of why we are in the situation we're in, because our people in our country don't recognize the context of where we're living, right? So that's why I
focused on
thank
John
you.
Ossoff running in Georgia, then a
Right.
city council campaign
In
Los
LA
Angeles,
with somebody who's
who
more
represents
powerful.
more people.
Who's more powerful.
We
Right.
shouldn't. Yeah, I agree.
Right.
We shouldn't strip context from local sovereignty,
Right.
local ideas of
Right.
representation.
Well, I
but there's
never-
patterns of
right.
transnational capital that mimic a lot of the things that we're seeing in the
Right.
United States. So
That's right.
if neoliberalism's successes have been remarkably similar across nation states, its failures are also being felt in Germany, much like it's being
Exactly.
felt in
Exactly.
California.
Very important.
So I
Right.
think
Yeah.
the solutions we can draw from international sense of solidarity, international sense of socialism, is looking for the kinds of techniques and pathways that are locally horizontal, but that move up that lever. Like I always say, electoral politics is the excrement end of social change. right? So the last thing we see.
Right.
It's
That's
the
right.
last thing we see
That's
when
right.
actual effective change occurs. And it's always going to be the local level things
Right.
that'll start first.
Absolutely.
And because we have the most potential power to transform our community when we work at the local level.
So John has a really interesting experience of this, I think, as a combat veteran, and seeing the way that our policies are implemented, right?
Yeah, share with us.
Well, yeah, that's something I really try and stress is getting people to focus on the military-industrial complex and how that's localized, how it intersects with every other kind of issue we're working on, how it's economically an issue when we're spending over half of our federal discretionary budget on defense, and also like as someone who was on the front lines, like in Iraq and Afghanistan, I've seen firsthand the utter failure of our policies, just how flawed they are. So, you know, I can accept that if our counterinsurgency strategy isn't working, you know, what if I can extrapolate that and apply that to basically everything else that the political elites are having us believe is the best course of action, and you need to trust us because we're the experts. And really, we're trying to change that narrative as veterans. Like, no, we're the experts. Like, we were the ones who were actually there. We saw it firsthand. We did these things. Like, y'all never been in combat. Most of them never even served in the military. You know, General Kelly's talking yesterday, and what is it? The press secretary was trying to use his service as a defensive mechanism against people questioning his authority. And yeah, the dude's a 4-star general, but he was never like in the trenches. You know, he didn't see serious combat. He was like a general when he was in Iraq. You know, he's getting hot chow and showers in the rear.
That's
while he's in
right. That's
so like
right.
people really need to question who these supposed experts are, and they need to listen to the people in public housing.
Yeah.
They need to listen to the average grunts who are on the ground.
That's a really good point, you know, because that whole process, it's a systemic thing.
Yes.
It's in a mindset of the people in this country. You know, there's a lot of really wonderful. I grew up in Middle America, so I know a lot about that. So what that is, that's a capitalist organization, basically, right? That in a partnership with the government, supposedly. But you can see that in our whole corporate structure.
Yep.
You know, where there's this privilege and this status, which is just complete nonsense. You know, and it's tearing us apart at a time when we need to be unified, you know, and it's doing exactly the opposite. And there are all sorts of solutions out there, as we've discussed many times on this show. We have to be the ones.
There are
really
solutions.
are.
That's real. There are real ways that this can get better.
That's
The
right.
hope is not lost. It's
So
really
in building
important.
a united left front from a local standpoint, also from there is the state, there is the national, which is why I was bringing that up. It's all connected, and we need to start from the bottom up.
I mean, one of the main things that we talk about at Ground Game and at Power, and when we're working in coalition. So I work with a community organization that's been around since '99 that works in coalition all across Los Angeles and has for a very long time. And one thing that we talk about is we talk about alignment versus, you know, being completely partnered on everything, right? It's not important for us to be partnered on everything to the point where every detailed policy, there can't be any hiccups. Like, we have to let go of that idea and really commit to being in, if we're in alignment with this organization, even if there's gonna be a policy or a measure, a proposition that we're not gonna agree on, we're still in alignment, right? I talk a lot about setting a vector for your organization. This is the vector that we want to move forward on, and then that allows us to remain flexible and move around within that, right? But continuing to stay on that path. And it's something we're seeing a lot with newer groups and bigger and groups that have grown enormously, like DSALA, for example.
Yes, and that's another thing we want to do with this show, and it's just beginning today. We've got like maybe another 8 minutes or so.
To figure it out.
Because, well, no, we're actually not.
Maybe not.
I tell you what, we've already figured out is that we're getting to know each other.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very big thing. And that's one of the reasons.
Basis for union organizing.
That's right. It's the basis for
Relationship
creating
building and
Yeah,
trust.
That's right.
Trust also is the other thing, right? It's
Yeah.
about
Right.
trust.
Yeah.
It's about
Right.
being able to have faith that, you know, I'll speak with people organized for Westside Renewal Power has been in an actual financial alignment and a partnership with an organization that operates in a different part of LA. We do the same work, we do it in very different neighborhoods. We actually have been fundraising together for 2 years. This was something we asked other organizations to join in with us on, and they were afraid.
Oh, really?
And part of that is because we are at Power, we are competing for the same grants as organizations doing the same work. And we have to figure out how to not be grant dependent as we go forward, because that money is scarce, that money is controlled by, in general, by a lot, by corporate Democrats, right? And so we need to be able to be independent of that money at some point. And one of the ways we've decided to go about that is to do a very radical thing and trust another organization to fundraise with us. So we fundraise with them and we split the money completely down the middle because we trust them. We've been working with them forever. So why can't we put our money literally where our mouth is on that, right? And that's something we've been inviting other organizations to enter into too. And it's a radical new way to fund this movement work, right? Because we do unfortunately have to fund this work, right?
That's right, that's right.
But that's part of this movement.
Yeah,
coalition,
absolutely.
yeah.
The United Food Workers and Cesar Chavez knew that really successful movements have a broad-based support mechanism for funding, and so the best movements tend to have a kind of balanced sense of funding. So for Inland Empire 2030, this organization that I'm a co-founder for, we're going to create a membership fee system. So we're going to have people put skin in the game at a very low level. People can choose based on income, much like DSA does, to kind of also sponsor someone else that can't pay for it, so much an Acorn model, but create a kind of community warehouse for ideas, right? Where we're all involved in this and that we're all pitching in some way, either through sweat equity, like that you may not have the money, but you can commit to time, you can do things actively, and we should honor that. We should also think about having a funding mechanism doesn't rely just on grants, and I agree, grants can be a dead end, you know.
Isn't that fantastic?
So do you have examples of the progress you've made in these organizations and alignments?
Of the progress that we made, yeah. I mean, we're a big part of the Fight for 15. We're a big part of the Human Right to Housing Collective. The legislation that's going through City Hall right now about Airbnb. We're a big part of that fight. We also, on a very personal level, we fight for our members individually. You know, John can tell you about one of our members, Anna Cruz.
Yeah, Anna Cruz, she's with Power, and she's an undocumented mother of 3 living on the west side, and she's a domestic violence survivor living in public housing, and she recently got evicted. We had fought that. We went to City Council member Bonin, who did go to bat for us, but he couldn't stop the eviction. And
He actually wrote a letter to Doug Guthrie, the president of the Housing Authority of Los Angeles, and said, "Do not evict this woman."
Yeah.
And they still did.
I mean, and we fought hard, but for a while, like there was nothing we could do. So the least we could do was show up, and we helped her move. We got all her stuff out. We got into a storage unit for
Bought
her.
her a storage unit.
Yeah, so at least
collected
she
money
didn't
for
lose
that.
everything, and hopefully we can get her back into housing. And like these are the things we really need to do for each other. And it's terrible because she's just going to be another number in our homeless count. The homeless number is going to
Right.
rise.
HACLA created a homeless family.
Yeah, so we made 4 people homeless, and the city will probably take someone else who's experiencing homeless, put them into that unit, use that as evidence of how we're solving the homeless crisis, and then another few years when the next pit count comes out and homelessness has rise again, city will go like, well, I don't know, it's a complicated
putting
issue.
people into housing.
Yeah, look
Yeah.
at this, we're trying. And so like stuff like that's just ridiculous. And if we really had campaigns around that, that's happening all over the city every single day. And these problems are causing much bigger problems. Like when someone becomes homeless, when they become poor and desperate, then what happens? Like crime rates go up. And,
That's right.
And they become victimized by police violence and theft, property and destruction of property during police sweeps of the homeless. So these problems really snowball into bigger issues. But
That's right.
this is like part of the community building we need that's
Right.
so absent in
Right.
cities where like people go into a city and they lose their identity and they don't know their neighbors and they don't want to know their neighbors.
That's
And they
right.
just complain about the noise and everything. It's like,
That's
I'm
right.
coming from a small town and
Right.
my nearest neighbor, like you couldn't even see them because we live in the woods. Everyone lives miles away, but you know every single one
That's
of them.
right.
And sometimes you got to walk a mile because you like locked yourself out of your house
That's
or
right.
whatever. And I mean, this is how like
I
we
lived in some
support
rural
each other.
areas. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
so
and
this
when we're
is how we can
canvassing
support,
for
yeah.
campaigns, and like people don't even want to answer their doors because they're like, I don't want to be bothered right now. Not even out of fear necessarily, but I don't want to answer my door to have to say no thank you to someone. And like that has a major issue on affecting change when we can't get people elected. Although I will say our canvassing was very effective.
It was.
I still see that from, I don't know, maybe it's a millennial thing, but I see that from like middle class people around my age where they joke about it. They joke about how they're terrified to answer the door, how they have to text someone that, hey, I'm outside, come answer your door, because they won't even knock. And I mean, like, we really need to change our thought process around these things and our attitudes.
And it's through relationship building and trust.
Right,
So,
and
also
that's
about
right.
threading the needle for folks so that, you know, I'm a 31-year-old white woman who doesn't live in poverty. I'm currently fighting an eviction right now because my landlord wants to make my unit into an Airbnb. That's happening to me. But that also means X number of people have been displaced from my neighborhood, are now currently homeless for the same reasons that I am being evicted, right? So I need to thread that needle and go, I don't need to organize a bunch of 31-year-old white women. I need to go find the people who are now currently homeless, who have already started organizing and are already doing the work, and say, how can I be of service to your fight? Because that will help my fight, right?
Yeah,
Fantastic.
I think
We're running out of time, so let's do some quick go around closing. Make it real quick, and then I'll have a closing statement going forward. Okay,
Yeah, I think the topics we brought out are really valuable. One of the things we can think about long term is stop treating real estate like baseball cards that you get to hide in your closet, and start thinking about community land trusts where the property of your community is rested in the hands of the public.
That's right.
And think in that transformational fact where the land is about the community that you live in, not about someone making a buck.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I concur with Matt. The whole idea of housing is not just local, it's a national issue because of the last crash we just had was a real estate crash.
And we're
then,
probably
of
going to
course,
have another one.
Right, the real estate speculators came back in and started buying up. I think it's Blackstone Group was one of them.
Yep.
Nationally, so there's got to be some way to stop put a halt to that immediately.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, everyone needs to organize, get organized. If you're not already, organize your neighborhood, your workplace, your classroom. Look for organizations in your community that are currently doing the work. A lot of them have been there for a long time, and if you need help, that's one other thing we do at Ground Game is we direct people, be like, oh, this is a good fit for you right here. These people are doing work in your part of town, so like that's one thing we can offer.
Fantastic.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that the biggest thing we can do culturally is change the way that we understand the word expertise and what that means, and start, what I will say to folks like me, you know, I'm a person who on site is never given credentials. Nobody thinks I'm an expert in anything because I look like this. So what I will say to people who are in that situation, which is everyone who's not white and male, is that what you can do is you can credential yourself. You can come in and say, this is where I am an expert. And everybody else can start to recognize that expertise comes from lived experience more than anything else. And that's one way that we can shift this and start to understand who are viable candidates.
And so, to the information where people can contact you, we'll put that in the closing credits of this episode. And I just want to say, going forward, let's continue this conversation. You all are invited back because we have work to do. We're building a united left front, and we're getting to know each other, and that's how we do it. And we find out what each other needs, and we go from there. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
That's good.
Fantastic. And more to be continued. This is Niswander. Thank you for watching live on YouTube. This is the Nowman Show. Be present always.
The past is gone, the future is yet to come, it's now, right now. The present is here, the future is near, but it's right now, you know. Being with you makes the party complete, so keep the body moving and show your happy feet. At the end of the night, when all is said and done, I wanna know I did the right thing.